My name is Aaliyah Morrison. I'm 30 years old and currently living in Denver, Colorado. I'm the founder of an independent financial consulting firm, having stood on my own 2 feet since I was very young. But no financial report could have prepared me for the shock that hit me that morning. It was around 8 in the morning. I was getting ready to enter a meeting with a major client when I got a call from the U.S. consulate in the Bahamas. The woman's voice on the other end was so serious that I dropped my coffee onto the floor. Your family, your parents, and 2 siblings have vanished from a luxury resort in Nassau. Their luggage is still in the room. No bills were paid. We suspect either an abduction or an accident. My heart pounded. I booked a flight immediately. During the nearly 10-hour flight, I couldn't stop praying. I imagined the worst. But what waited for me in the Bahamas wasn't a crime scene, it was a truth even more bitter. At the front desk, the hotel manager handed me a thick stack of invoices. Total charges, over $80,000. Name on the payment authorization, Aaliyah Morrison. What would you do if one day you discovered you were the victim of fraud and the perpetrators were your own blood? Leave a comment below if you've ever been taken advantage of by family. Hit like if you believe trust should have limits. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear the rest of the story because this is only the beginning. I was born and raised in a small town about an hour outside Dallas. My family was what outsiders would call traditional. Dad was a well-known local mechanic. Mom stayed home and I was the oldest of 3. Weekend cookouts were common with extended family, where every word weighed like a stone, and every expectation on me felt like unwritten law. The oldest daughter must be the one who gives in, who sacrifices. Since grade school, I had learned to quietly clean up after family gatherings, take care of my sister when mom was tired, help dad count every last penny to pay the electric bill. I never dared ask why those responsibilities always landed on me. When I got into the gifted program at school, my mother only said, "Good. That means you'll be able to take care of the whole family someday." I didn't argue. I just tried to excel. During high school, I spent almost every afternoon working part-time at the town bookstore. Most of my earnings went toward paying my own tuition. But when Dylan, my younger brother, got suspended for unpaid fees and falling short of credit hours, my mother sighed and looked at me. "He's a boy. He can't drop out. Can you take care of it?" I gritted my teeth and drained 3 years of savings. No one said thank you. They saw it as my obligation. At 23, I co-founded a small personal finance startup with a close friend in Houston. It was tough at first, but when a major company acquired our product, I walked away with over $200,000. For someone in their 20s, that felt like a dream start. But I didn't buy a house, didn't travel, didn't reinvest. I used half the money to pay for my mom's surgery when she was diagnosed with a thyroid tumor, too urgent to wait for insurance approval. I also co-signed a loan so my sister could get a car to commute to work after her divorce and losing custody of her child. Relatives called me the pride of the Carter family. But I knew they were only proud as long as I kept footing the bill for what they called emergencies. I remember one evening when I mentioned wanting to move north to pursue a new job opportunity. My father set down his chopsticks, didn't even look at me, and asked, "Then who's going to pay the rent if you leave?" My mother's response was colder. "Don't be selfish. You're doing great here." I stayed silent through that entire meal. I understood my place clearly. I wasn't a daughter. I was a machine to keep the system running. At 29, I moved to Denver without telling anyone. I rented a small apartment in Capitol Hill and started from scratch, building a financial advisory platform specifically for independent women. No one called. No one checked in. Not until my sister texted, "Hey, my car got towed. Can you spot me 2,000?" Did I realize they hadn't forgotten me? I didn't reply, and I slept soundly through the night. Life in Denver wasn't easy, but it gave me a freedom I'd never tasted before. I worked 12 hours a day, met clients, handled every challenge myself, and most importantly, I was no longer confined to the role of the sacrificial daughter. I didn't need anyone's permission to make decisions about my own life. Within 4 months, my company began gaining stable clients. then expanded faster than I expected. I hired staff, built partnerships. Part of me knew it was the discipline and pressure from my childhood that shaped me into a resilient businesswoman. But another part knew I'd paid for that strength with my childhood and strained relationships. I still kept in touch with my family ceremonially. Sent birthday cards, made holiday calls. But I stopped sharing about work. I didn't mention the million-dollar contracts or the awards I received from women's business networks. I feared that if they knew, the emergency calls would start again. But even with distance, I never expected they'd still find a way. I never shared my financial details. But I had once, nearly 2 years ago, handed my mother a supplementary credit card, just so she could book a follow-up appointment online while I was swamped with work. Then I forgot it existed. Apparently, she didn't. I used to think my sacrifices were for love, that no matter how careless they were with me, at the end of the day, they were still my family. Until I stood in the lobby of that resort in the Bahamas and saw my name on every single card transaction, from fine seafood dinners to forehand beach massages, and the receptionist smiled and said, "You were so generous to reserve a villa for your entire family for 6 weeks. We hope you were satisfied." I didn't book it. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even informed. I didn't cry. My mind just went blank, as if every sound around me was muffled, reduced to a dull roar like ocean waves crashing against stone. 6 weeks. They had lived in luxury for 6 straight weeks, while I was eating egg sandwiches at my desk, thinking work was consuming my life. I took a deep breath and turned to the hotel staff. Where did they go? She looked at me, her expression slowly shifting to confusion. "Ma'am, they left for the airport this morning, but since the final bill wasn't paid, we notified the U.S. consulate and flagged them for travel restrictions. They disappeared after that." I stood still. I had given them too much, but what they wanted wasn't help. They wanted control. They wanted to indulge off the blood and sweat I had poured into my life. And when I stopped giving, they didn't let go. They snuck back and stole it behind my back. Everything truly began when I stepped into the villa they had stayed in. A maintenance worker handed me something no one expected. An envelope, labeled with my name and my mother's familiar handwriting, sealed neatly with tape, left in the drawer of bedroom number 3. Inside was a printed sheet with my company's bank details, and a handwritten note in blue ink. "Aaliyah, we're just borrowing it. We're family." I clenched the paper in my hand, a chill running down my spine. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a rash decision. This was a plan. One that had started long ago, and I simply hadn't wanted to see it. I was typing the final touches of a presentation for a Japanese client when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with an international code. I hesitated. Part of me was about to let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. A middle-aged man's voice came through polite, clear, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "Is this Aaliyah Morrison? I'm calling from the U.S. consulate in Nassau, Bahamas. We're currently handling an emergency involving your family." I straightened up, my heart pounding in my chest. "We received a report from the resort where your parents and 2 younger siblings were staying. They haven't returned to their rooms since this morning. Their luggage is still there, and there's no sign of a proper checkout. The hotel tried to contact them but got no response. Local police are now assisting in the search, but we need you to come immediately to verify their identity and handle some financial matters." I froze. I didn't even know they were in the Bahamas. I hadn't been informed of anything. "You're saying my family is on vacation?" I never. I had no idea about this. There was a pause on the other end. Then the man continued slowly. "I'm sorry, but according to the records from Crystal Haven Hotel, the 6-week reservation is under your name. All expenses were charged to a credit card, linked to an account under Aaliyah Morrison. The current bill has exceeded $80,000. I jumped out of my seat. "What did you say?" $80,000? That's impossible. I never signed anything, never agreed to that. Since when have they been using my card? The first transaction was recorded around 6 weeks ago. It includes the villa reservation, advanced spa packages, private yacht services, meals, and a number of smaller charges. The hotel tried reaching out to the payment holder yesterday after noticing the guests hadn't shown up to check out, but no one responded. That's why they contacted us. I'm sorry, but you are the only person listed on all payment records. I couldn't hear anything. After that, it felt like all the sound around me had been drowned out by a heavy, hollow ringing in my chest. I stared at my computer screen, where the financial report I had been working on still glowed with neat rows of numbers. Everything here followed order, structure, but the world outside had just collapsed beneath my feet. That night, I booked the earliest flight to Nassau. On the plane, I tried to rationalize things, like the financial analyst I was. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the card had been compromised. Maybe I couldn't bring myself to think the worst. But between logic and intuition, I knew something was wrong. Deeply wrong. When I arrived, I went straight to Crystal Haven, a luxurious resort perched by the ocean, described on their website as a tropical paradise for the elite. The manager greeted me in a polished, wood-paneled office with a panoramic view of the bay. On her desk sat a cream-colored folder, perfectly aligned. "We're very sorry about the situation. Here is a detailed invoice currently pending payment. The total outstanding amount as of today is $82,435 US. She slid the folder toward me. The first page listed charges organized by date. My full name, not a letter missing, sat at the top under primary account holder. I flipped through the following pages. Daily spa services for 4. Dinners at a high-end seafood restaurant averaging nearly $900 a night. A private yacht cruise, 3 days and 2 nights. A golf outing at the island's most exclusive club. Shopping at the duty-free store, including a Rolex and expensive niche perfumes. I asked, my voice dry, "Who made these transactions?" The manager opened her laptop and showed me the video recordings used for transaction confirmations. There was my father, calmly signing for a vintage wine delivery at the villa. My mother, stacking shopping bags onto the golf cart, heading to Stave, the spa. My brother, grinning as he posed with yacht crew members. My sister, in a turquoise swimsuit, sipping cocktails at the bar, paying with my card. The manager spoke gently. "I'm truly sorry, but every transaction was completed with in-person verification by your family members. We have all the documentation signatures, photos. We assumed they had your permission." I clenched my fists and sat motionless. I couldn't believe it. They had lived 6 weeks in a tropical paradise, enjoying luxuries I had never even dreamed of. They spent without hesitation. They indulged. And not one word was sent to me. No message. No thanks. I asked, "Where are they now?" At 3 a.m. This morning, they left the villa and requested a private car to the airport. But the final transaction couldn't be processed, so we involved the authorities. However, by the time staff reached the room, they were gone. I stood up. "Are you saying they fled?" "We can't confirm that, but at this time, they are no longer on hotel property. Some of their luggage was left behind, and they failed to settle the account. Under Bahamian law, this could be considered service fraud." I let out a bitter, soundless laugh. My whole body felt cold. For the past 6 weeks, I had been working around the clock, managing projects, trying to keep my company afloat during a volatile market. I had turned down rest because I thought it wasn't time yet. And all along, the very people I called family were living their dream vacation on my sweat. The manager then escorted me to Villa 203, where they had stayed all that time. I stepped across the threshold, feeling like a stranger entering someone else's home. But everything here, every silk towel, every half-finished wine glass, every handwritten note by the phone had been paid for by me. I didn't touch anything. I just looked around. Sunlight poured in through the patio doors, illuminating a photo on the living room, table the whole family, beaming around a candlelit feast. The frame read, "Family is everything." I turned away. Something inside my chest shattered into 100 sharp pieces. And I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a plan, a deliberate scheme, and I had been caught in it without even knowing. I flew back to Denver in a state no words could properly describe. It wasn't anger, not just betrayal. It was something more like internal collapse, as if someone had drained all the air from my lungs and left me alone in a vacuum with nothing left to believe in. I couldn't sleep on the flight. I sat upright for 6 hours, my mind spiraling with questions I couldn't answer. How did they get my card information? Who started it? My mother? My sister? Was it all of them together? I hoped it was just an impulsive mistake, but the receipts didn't lie, and the evidence pointed to long-term planning. As soon as I got back to my office, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and opened my laptop. I pulled up every credit card statement, line by line. I managed all corporate accounts, including several employee cards. Among them was a supplemental card I had created nearly 2 years ago to help my mother schedule doctor visits. I had never canceled it, because I never thought they would do this. 4 other corporate cards had also been used. One had exceeded its limit, directly affecting the cash flow on a contract awaiting final signature with a Japanese partner. I immediately called the bank to freeze all activity and printed every transaction history available. My desk turned into a maze of paper, every page highlighted, every expense tagged, every detail dissected. I wasn't going to miss a single thing. I needed to know exactly what had happened and when it had started. The first Crystal Haven transaction showed up 6 weeks ago on a Monday morning, the day I was in Dallas, delivering a keynote at a national startup summit. They had started with a $5,000 deposit labeled 3-bedroom beachfront villa, 45 days advance booking. Then came the travel insurance fees, room upgrades, private yacht bookings, spa sessions, fine dining, duty-free shopping. Step by step, the transactions escalated in volume, running non-stop for over a month. One night, they ordered 4 bottles of Chateau Margaux, 2005, a wine considered a dream on the tongue by the elite, each bottle costing more than $2,500. Another entry read, Rolex Boutique, Women's Date Just, White Gold Bracelet, Mother of Pearl Dial, 12,800 USD. My heart sank like a stone. I opened Instagram, searched for my sister Madison's profile, now set to private, but I still had a saved link to an old story she once posted to our family group chat. The story was deleted, but my auto backup app had already stored it, and when the image popped up on screen, I nearly dropped my phone. Madison stood in front of the mirror wearing an off-shoulder white dress. A Cartier necklace shimmered around her neck, and a wine glass dangled from her hand. The caption read simply, Deserve the best. I continued scrolling through the cloud album. Next was a photo of my mother sitting in the VIP room at the Baha Mar Casino. She wore a fur stole, surrounded by elegantly dressed women. Her cheeks were flushed, her mouth wide in laughter, holding up a golden metallic card with pride. Then came the image of my father at a golf course, shaking hands with a silver-haired man in a Ralph Lauren polo shirt. Behind them was a luxury golf cart bearing the logo of the Royal Nassau Elite Club. I had no idea who that man was, but in the photo, my father smiled radiant and carefree, like a man with not a worry in the world. I started checking the comments that had since been deleted. A few of Madison's old friends had still left remarks. Vacation looks amazing. Living the dream, Maddie. The fam's on fire. No one tagged me. Not a single hint that I had anything to do with what they were enjoying. They were celebrating, and I had been completely erased from that world. I put down my glass of water and tried to breathe deeply, but my throat locked up. It wasn't the money that made my hands tremble. I could always earn it back. What shook me wasn't the $82,435. It was the fact that for 6 weeks, not a single person thought to call me. Not one message. Not one check-in to ask if I was okay. I grabbed my phone and called my closest friend from college, Elena. She's a lawyer now, based in Chicago. Are you free? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Hearing your voice makes me want to leave this meeting right now. What's going on? I just found out the corporate credit card's been used for 6 straight weeks. The total spending is over 80 grand, and the users are my family. There was silence on the other end. Then Elena sighed. Aaliyah, you need to start collecting every document immediately. Print the statements, save screenshots. I know this is hard, but you need to think legally now. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is theft. I never wanted to call it that, I whispered. But you have to, Elena replied. You're the victim. It doesn't matter who they are. I ended the call without a word. I still couldn't bring myself to accept it. But clearly, this wasn't just about family anymore. This was calculated. They knew exactly what they were doing. I switched over to the company's internal email system. One of the compromised cards was linked to a Google Workspace account. When I checked the login history, I saw a strange device had accessed it from an IP address in Miami 2 weeks ago, using an old shared login I'd once let my mother use. The deeper I dug, the more layers I uncovered, peeled back without me ever noticing. It felt like discovering I had been watched for a long time without ever knowing. I opened a new Excel file and titled it Unauthorized Transactions, Details. Line by line, day by day, I color-coded entries, marked suspects, added image links, cited bank statement sources. I didn't do it to put anyone in jail. I did it to regain control, to remind myself I wasn't imagining things, that what was happening was real. When the clock hit 10 p.m, I reviewed the spreadsheet, total expenditures at $82,435. But with added fees, unresolved charges, and penalties for exceeding limits, the number could reach over 93,000. And there I was alone in my dark office, lit only by a desk lamp, surrounded by piles of paperwork. My hands were cold, my back ached, but in my chest a fire had begun to rise. I didn't know where they were now, but I knew I would find out, and they wouldn't. I'd be smiling so brightly in those photos, not while I was still breathing to see justice done. I was sitting by the window, the early morning light of Denver filtering through white curtains, spilling across unfinished papers on my desk, when a text came through. The name on the screen stunned me. Elliot, the man who dated my sister for nearly 2 years before their very public breakup. I don't mean to interfere in family matters, the message began, but I heard your dad and Madison used your company's name to secure funding for a startup. I think you should check federal filings. I reread the message, my heart skipping a beat. Elliot wasn't the kind of person to make careless claims. He worked in finance, understood legal risks, and knew my family well enough to recognize when something that sounded outrageous might actually be true. I opened my laptop and accessed the IRS business tax records. Within minutes, I found something that froze me in my chair. Under the lookup for my company's EIN, a number only my accountant and I had access to, was a financial sponsorship listing for a separate entity, Carter Leisure Group, LLC. I had never heard of that name before. My business focused on digital payment platforms. This clearly sounded like hospitality or travel. I kept digging into Carter Leisure Group's registration. The listed president, Gregory H. James. I froze. That was my father's full name. Just below it, the legal representative, Madison James, my sister. I leaned back from the screen, my arms slack at my sides. The wind outside blew softly, but inside, it felt like a storm was tearing through the foundation of everything I thought was mine. My father owned the company. My sister managed its legal affairs. And the doorway they used to make it all legitimate was the name of the company I had built over the last 7 years. I called Elliot. He picked up quickly. I'm sorry if this puts you in an awkward spot, but when I saw them pitching the project at a Miami networking event, something didn't sit right. Did you know they were using your company's name? No, I said slowly. And they don't have my permission. How did they even get the tax records, the EIN? Those things I've never shared with anyone. I'm not sure, Elliot said, his voice low. But Madison once mentioned that a while ago you had accounting documents stored in a shared cloud folder. She said your mom had access. I went silent. I remembered now. 2 years ago, when my mother needed proof of income for a medical loan application, I had scanned and uploaded financial statements to a private cloud link we both accessed. I trusted her. I never imagined she'd share them, or worse, use them. "Thank you, Elliot," I whispered. "If it weren't for you, I might never have found out. You should call a lawyer." "Immediately," he said gently. "They didn't just spend your money, they've dragged your name into some serious legal liability." After the call, I contacted my company's legal advisor. He scheduled a meeting for later that day. In the meantime, I searched Florida's business registry where Carter Leisure Group LLC had filed for operation. Every detail matched. The company was incorporated 3 months ago, claiming financial backing from Aaliyah James Holdings, my company. There was even a loan agreement on file with a Miami-based lender, total line of credit up to $300,000 partially dispersed. Every cent of that funding rested on the collateral and credibility of my business. This wasn't just about reputation. If Carter Leisure Group engaged in financial misrepresentation, my company could face federal scrutiny for money laundering. I called the bank, requested every statement related to the EIN, combed through quarterly reports for irregularities. Simultaneously, I worked with the IT security team to revoke all legacy access, reset passwords, and implement full two-factor authentication across all systems. I also filed a business credit alert, flagging that my company was being misrepresented. A credit bureau agent called back soon after, confirming there had been 4 recent credit checks originating from Carter Leisure Group. I asked him, "Can you tell me what they were applying for?" "They claimed they were raising capital to launch a luxury resort chain," he said. "Something about blending entertainment, wellness, and senior living. Sounds like a green startup pitch with sustainable goals. But what?" But I suspected there was exploitation involved. The financial reports they sent were blatantly altered, and the company address turned out to be a short-term apartment rental. I sighed, a storm of doubt swirling in my chest. My father used to be a structural engineer, well-versed in real estate. But after 60, he retired and kept mostly to himself. Madison, on the other hand, had never run a startup aside from a few failed attempts at selling cosmetics online. So what gave them the nerve to start a company? To take out loans? To put their names on legal paperwork and declare my business as their financial guarantor? There was only one answer. They thought I would never find out. Or, if I did, I would forgive them. What they failed to understand was that I was no longer the same Aaliyah who once sold her equity just to help cover her mother's hospital bills. I had changed. I had survived months clawing my way out of financial ruin. And now, what I was protecting wasn't just my assets. It was my name, my work, and the livelihoods of dozens of people depending on me. I drafted an email to my attorney. Subject: urgent. Legal exploitation within family business. I attached every document, screenshots, scanned files, photos, proof of appropriation. I asked for an immediate legal protection plan by the end of the week. I knew the road ahead would be rough, but I also knew I couldn't turn away like nothing had happened. I couldn't keep quiet for the sake of some false sense of peace. Because when someone uses your name to build a fraudulent world, silence becomes complicity. And I ended that silence starting today. I stepped out of my lawyer's office late in the afternoon, my mind spinning from the stack of legal disclaimers and worst-case scenarios. The Denver air that day was unusually heavy, but my hands were ice cold. In front of me stood the truth. They hadn't just used my company's name to take out loans. They might have committed something far more serious and dragged me into it without a word. Before I even got home, my phone vibrated. Unknown number, New York area code. I hesitated, then picked up. "Aaliyah?" A deep, calm voice came through, the background filled with cafe noise. "This is Andrew Keller. I was your father's private attorney earlier this year when he was in New York with your sister. I know I'm no longer involved, but there's something you should know." I paused. The name didn't ring any bells. "Why are you calling me?" "There's a real estate guarantee on file under your name," he said slowly. "A villa in Miami Beach, worth over $1 million. The signature on the paperwork matches your company contract. But I'm almost certain it's forged." My grip tightened on the phone. I stepped quickly toward a nearby park bench. Are you saying they faked my signature? That's not all. Andrew lowered his voice. They attached a scanned passport in your name, plus an asset verification letter from your corporate bank. I've seen your real file back when I worked in Denver. I can tell this one's fake. But an average auditor wouldn't catch it. I've already flagged it in the federal system as suspicious. But if you don't act fast, you might be the first one investigated. Everything around me felt dense. I couldn't hear the sounds of people anymore, only the tight, cold silence inside my own head. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I met your mother, he replied. And I have a gut feeling they're not going to stop. After the call, I sat in my car without starting the engine, unable to bring myself to drive home. I called my corporate attorney and explained everything. She was quiet for a long moment before responding. Aaliyah, this is no longer a civil dispute. If they're using forged signatures, fake passports, and tying it to real estate, this could count as federal-level money laundering. And according to current law, the guarantor, whether or not they were impersonated, can be prosecuted first, if separation isn't proven in time. My hands went numb. We need to hire a private investigator, she continued. We have to find out where they are, what they're doing, and get hard evidence that you're not involved. Next day, I met a man named James Harlow, a former federal fraud investigator, now working in the private sector. I handed him a copy of Carter Leisure Group's file, a few recovered Instagram photos, and the report from Andrew Keller. He scanned the documents, then asked plainly, "Are you ready for the truth?" "I've come too far to stop," I answered. James began the investigation that very afternoon. Less than 72 hours later, he called me back. I traced transactions from virtual credit cards linked to the fake company records, and I found them. My breath caught in my throat. "They're in Florida," he continued. "Specifically, a luxury villa inside a beachfront resort in Sarasota. The lease is under the name Brittany Huxley, clearly fake, but the faces aren't. I pulled footage from security cameras. Your father, your mother, and your sister are all living there. They haven't disappeared. They're hiding." I clenched my phone so tightly my bead temples throbbed. "And here's the most dangerous part." James paused for a beat, then enunciated clearly. "They're using false identities." "What kind of documents?" "Passports. Each of them has a fake passport enough to bypass federal watch lists if they try to leave the country." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had stayed up countless nights imagining they'd been kidnapped, that something terrible had happened. But the truth was, they were living it up by the beach, under aliases, running a fake startup using my business name, mortgaging property, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and planning to disappear. James sent me a few snapshots from security footage. Madison strolling with a Hermes bag, beaming. My father chatting at the bar with a man in a tailored suit. My mother lounging in designer sunglasses, reading a newspaper with an open champagne bottle by her side. Looking at those images, my chest tightened, not from heartbreak, but from sheer audacity. I asked James, "What can I do right now?" "You have two options," he said, eyes locked. "First, report directly to the IRS and Federal Fraud Prevention. Second, file a civil suit, freeze all Carter Leisure Group assets, and demand an emergency audit. But if you choose the second path, you need to be ready for full exposure. Media, court, family." I sat silently. There are moments in life when you realize no matter what you choose, there's no turning back. But I had spent too long being the dutiful daughter turned financial tool. And now, when silence could destroy everything I've built, my career, my name, I had no choice but to bring it all into the light. With evidence, with truth, with the conviction that this time, I no longer needed anyone standing behind me. I arrived in Sarasota on a hazy afternoon, the wind from the bay tousling my hair. The villa complex sat deep inside a quiet luxury resort, guarded by electronic gates and private driveways. I wore a beige tailored suit, my hair pinned up, tablet in hand, and a badge that read, "Elizabeth Crane, Senior Property Manager." Crown Real Estate. It was the identity James had set up for me, flawless enough to get me past security. Good afternoon, the guard smiled. You here to check Villa H47? I'm here to conduct a pre-transfer inspection on behalf of the investment firm, I replied calmly. Might swing by a few other units on the row. The owners have been notified. After a few questions and a nod of approval, the gates opened. I drove slowly along the stone-paved roads, flanked by manicured palms and elegant villas tucked behind high wooden fences. The whole place was serene to the point of suffocation. I stopped in front of Unit H47. The gate was ajar. I pressed the bell. No one answered. I pulled out my tablet, tapped lightly on the screen, pretending to take notes, then used my voice to send a signal to James, who was monitoring. Security cameras a few blocks away. She's in there, he whispered in my earpiece. The back door's open. Go in if you feel safe. I pushed the gate gently and stepped into the yard. Under the late afternoon sun, everything shimmered, golden. A still blue pool, lounge chairs draped in white towels, a few half-finished glasses of red wine on the table. Then I heard the click of heels. From the hallway leading to the patio, a woman stepped out. My mother. Her hair was dyed chestnut brown, softly curled. She wore a smoky purple silk maxi dress, a gold Cartier on her wrist, the very watch I had once seen in a deleted Instagram story. Her eyes landed on me. No surprise, no fear. Only a slow frown, as if I had disrupted a lazy afternoon. Oh, so you found us? She asked. Her voice was the same calm, light as a breeze over water, but sharp as a silent blade. I didn't answer right away. I walked forward until only a few steps separated us. I searched everywhere for you, I said, keeping my voice steady. The consulate called me in the middle of the night, saying you, Dad, and the kids might be missing, maybe even kidnapped. I thought something had really happened. She smirked faintly, a smile laced with meaning. You always overreact. I drew in a deep breath. And then I found out. A villa rented under fake names. Fake passports. Tens of thousands of dollars charged on my corporate card. What do you call that? She placed her hand on her hip, her eyes never wavering. How do you think you got that life, Aaliyah? She said in that familiar tone. Your father worked 2 jobs for 18 years. I gave up accounting to raise 3 kids. And you? Study abroad, startups, your own company. Who gave you the foundation? This family. Who paid your first year of college? Who mortgaged the old house in Austin so you could have credit to secure your initial loan? I stood silent. I didn't deny the past, but I wouldn't let her twist it. I paid it all back, I said. I sold shares to cover Aaron's tuition. I paid your medical bills. I covered utilities when Dad was out of work. I thought that was devotion. But it was just an unwritten contract where I was the personal bank, and everyone else the beneficiaries. My mother gave a soft laugh, her eyes drifting around the yard. You think just because you're successful, you can stand above us? I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table. If you see me as a walking wallet, then at least I have the right to defend myself. I tapped the red button. Everything you just said is recorded. Thank you, you've just confirmed motive. For the first time, her expression shifted. A flicker of shock crossed her eyes before she composed herself again. You're threatening me? No, I replied. I'm protecting myself from prosecution, because right now, if the FBI opens an investigation, the president of the fake company is Dad. The legal representative is Madison. And the guarantor's signature on the real estate file is mine. But this recording and the evidence from the private investigator will prove I was exploited. I picked up my phone and saved the file. I didn't come here to beg, or to hear another lecture. I came to say this. It ends here. My mother stayed silent. Then she stepped closer, her voice low enough that the breeze wouldn't carry it away. You always think you're righteous, but you don't understand one thing. In this family, love was never unconditional. I looked at her and a smile tugged at my lips. That's exactly why I have to leave. I turned, walked straight out the gate, never looking back. James was waiting by the car, his eyes not asking questions, just a slight nod. I knew he understood. And I understood too. The storm was far from over. But I had passed the hardest part, the moment of facing the very person who gave me life and naming, the truth we had both avoided for years. I left Florida and returned to Denver the very next day. On the long flight back, I couldn't sleep. Every word from my mother still echoed like a voice bouncing in a narrow alley, cold, unyielding, without remorse. But I knew my emotions were no longer something I could afford to nurture. I had to act not only to protect my company, but to reclaim the dignity and identity they had used as a mask for their corruption. The moment I landed, I went straight to the office. No lights, no coffee. I sat at my desk and opened every file I had saved. The folder labeled FL Investigation held everything. Photos from the private investigator, audio recordings, copies of fake passports, receipts from the Bahamas, incorporation papers for Carter Leisure Group, bearing my forged signature. One short clip showed my father laughing on a yacht, his arms slung over a man James confirmed had once been investigated for laundering money. I gathered it all and attached it to a formal case file sent to the FBI's Western District office. In my email, I stated clearly, my identity had been illegally used to establish a shell company, secure loans, and conduct suspicious financial transactions. I requested an urgent federal investigation, supplying every piece of evidence I had. Less than 48 hours later, I got a response. A federal agent named Erica Gilman called me directly. "We've reviewed your file. It's remarkably detailed, and what stands out is this isn't the work of one person, it's organized," she said calmly. "We're launching a federal investigation under financial crimes and identity fraud. We may need your cooperation further." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. "I'm ready." After the call, I reached out to a respected law firm I'd worked with on equity deals. I chose Clarence Myers, a veteran in civil litigation and corporate reputation. We met in his office, a stately room lined with dark wood shelves overlooking the park. "Do you want to pursue a civil case?" he asked after reviewing the bank statements and Carter Leisure Group filings. "I can file immediately, seeking damages for financial loss, reputational harm, and legal costs." I sat silent for a few moments, then spoke slowly. "The direct losses total close to $150,000. But the reputational damage, the effect on my partners, that can't be measured. I want to file a civil suit, demand $240,000 in compensation, and force them to cease all unauthorized use of my name in any financial activity." Clarence nodded. "We'll have the filing ready within 24 hours. The next morning, I signed the official complaint filed with the Denver County Civil Court. Defendants: Robert S. Carter, Madison Carter, and Jenna Carter, my parents and my sister. The claims were clear, uncompromising. I no longer avoided the truth that my own blood had exploited me for fraud. Each signature I penned no longer trembled. For years, I thought emotions made me weak. But in that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't surrender, it was the strength to face them without fear. When the lawsuit was filed, the media didn't catch wind of it because I had requested the case be sealed. But only a few days later, a federal audit was launched in Florida. The villa they had stayed in was seized. Bank accounts tied to Carter Leisure Group were temporarily frozen. I received an email from Agent Erica. "We're working with partners in Florida and the IRS. This is very likely part of a larger network using shell companies to move illicit funds. You just helped open an entirely new line of investigation." I didn't feel relief, only clarity. Things were finally coming into focus. I was no longer in the dark. And more importantly, I no longer let anyone else decide where the boundaries of family were drawn. A week later, I was invited to a closed hearing to confirm details. In the small meeting room, there were no reporters, no cameras, only attorneys, agents, and me. When asked what made me decide to report my own family, I answered, "Because I want to live without fearing those who share my blood. And because I don't want anyone else to have to trade their trust for a false ticket to forgiveness." They nodded, took notes, and when I walked out, The light in the hallway no longer felt blinding. Every night after that, I checked my email. Not out of fear, but because I knew with each step, I was rewriting my story. Not with tears or resentment, but with law, reason, and courage. The legal battle hadn't settled when another front suddenly exploded, not in the courtroom, but across news sites, social media, and morning broadcasts. I was sitting in my office, buried in files, when Myra, my communications aide, pushed the door open, her face tense. "You should see this," she said, placing an iPad in front of me. On the screen was a headline from the Denver Metro Chronicle: "Young CEO's identity stolen by family strikes back with cold-blooded legal action." Below the headline was a photo of me at a business conference, face serious, gaze unwavering. Beside it, images of my mother and sister taken from old stories, lounging at the Bahamas resort. The article quoted my civil suit, summarizing allegations of financial abuse, identity theft, shell company fraud, and corporate card misuse. Under the comments, hundreds of people weighed in, most furious, supportive of me. "Can't believe family would do that. Hope she wins. We need role models like this in business." So cruel. My sister once drained my account with a fake loan. But I knew the story wouldn't stay one-sided, and I was right. The next day, while I was in a legal meeting discussing the possibility of taking the case to federal court, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from colleagues, old, friends, even investors. A video was spreading fast. My mother and sister had staged a small press conference, with a lawyer named Greg Patterson at their side. They sat before cameras, faces animated, voices trembling as if weighed down by unbearable injustice. Aaliyah gifted her family a token of gratitude, a vacation to thank them for raising her into success, the lawyer said, clutching a stack of papers of unclear content. "We were blindsided by this lawsuit. It's a shocking blow to a family that's always been there for her." My sister Jenna's eyes brimmed with tears. "She knew we used her card to book the resort," she told us. "Go enjoy yourselves. Think of it as a late graduation gift." I had never said that. Not a single word, not a single text existed to prove such a claim. But packaged with professional cameras, soft background music, and a few tears, suddenly it carried weight. The comments under the video split. Some still stood with me. Others began to doubt. Could they all really be lying? Maybe she said it and forgot? Successful people often get cold with family. I stared at the screen, anger and exhaustion rising together. I couldn't let them twist the narrative. I couldn't let the frauds play the victims. That evening, I sat in my home office. No production crew, no props. Just a phone on a tripod, a small LED light, and silence behind a closed door. I turned on the camera, looked straight into the lens, took a long breath. My name is Aaliyah Carter, and today I want to tell the truth, not with tears, but with evidence. I shared the story from the beginning, from the consulate's midnight call, to the fraudulent transactions, to uncovering their fake identities in Florida. My voice stayed calm, but the hurt still edged every word. When I reached the part where my mother told me I owed the family my life, I played the recording right in the middle of the video. Her cold, cutting voice rang out, undeniable. Then I showed the forged incorporation papers for Carter Leisure Group with my falsified signature. Cut to invoices from the villa, the Instagram stories I had recovered, and finally the FBI's official letter confirming an open financial crime investigation. "I don't want this to be a media spectacle," I concluded, voice low. "But when those who commit wrong start painting themselves as victims, I have no choice but to speak up." The video ran just under 8 minutes. I uploaded it to a YouTube channel I had opened only 3 days earlier, titled simply, "Aaliyah, the Truth." I didn't think much of it, I just wanted my voice heard. But within an hour, the video had over 50,000 views. By morning, nearly 2 million. Messages poured in from TV networks. Some invited me onto talk shows. Others requested to rebroadcast the video nationwide. Online, the tide shifted quickly. The hashtag number Justice for Aaliyah trended on Twitter. Independent journalists dissected the evidence, and most concluded, my family was trying to rewrite the script with crocodile tears. I didn't accept TV invites. I didn't give loud statements. Everything I needed to say was in that video. And for the first time in months, public opinion stood with me, not because I was a victim, but because I had the courage to state the truth unvarnished, unproduced, unscripted. In the calm after the storm, I sat alone in my living room, the soft glow of a floor lamp illuminating a framed photo of me with my team from last year. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. Only that finally, my voice was no longer buried under the noise of those who thought blood gave them the right to control me. The federal trial began on a bleak December morning in Texas, heavy gray clouds pressing down over Houston like a leaden curtain. I stood at the entrance of the federal courthouse, where the three people once called my family were about to face the consequences of what they had done. Each step I took inside weighed more not from fear, but from knowing I was closing a chapter that had been hollowed out long ago. The gallery was packed. Reporters crowded outside. Every bench filled with strangers, with lawyers, with former colleagues. Some came out of curiosity, others to see justice carried out, and still others because the story had become national. On the defendant's bench sat the three faces once present at family dinners, birthdays, quiet nights I had once thought were happy. My father, Raymond Carter, hair gone stark white since his arrest, sat blank-eyed. Beside him, my mother, Loretta, her face painted in makeup but unable to hide her exhaustion. And Jenna, my little sister, who once held my hand learning the alphabet, now sat with her head bowed, her lip bitten until it bled. The prosecutor read the indictment. Each charge rang sharp in the air: financial abuse of trust, falsifying records, identity fraud, federal wire fraud, operating a shell company to misappropriate assets, federal money laundering through Florida real estate and interstate credit lines. Each count sliced deeper into what the world once called family. When it was my turn to take the stand, the room fell silent. The air felt heavy, thick, and the only sound was my heels tapping lightly against the polished wood floor. The prosecutor asked me 3 questions, short, sharp. What is your name? Aaliyah Carter. Do you confirm that your assets and identity were unlawfully used in the transactions connected to Carter Leisure Group? I confirm. Do you have anything you wish to say to the court before we move to sentencing? I looked toward the 3 of them. They avoided my gaze. None dared lift their heads. I drew in a deep breath, steadying my voice before speaking. I am not here out of anger. I don't need them to repay the money, because those numbers were gone long ago. But there is one thing I always hoped to keep, something I believed couldn't be stolen: the meaning of family. I fixed my eyes on my father. I once thought you were the one who taught me independence. But in truth, what you taught me best was how to survive when no one else would protect me. I turned to my mother. I once thought you understood me the most, but you saw me as a share to be drained dry. An investment that needed no love, only returns. Then my eyes rested on Jenna, the only one still looking at me. You were the child who clung to me every time our parents lost their tempers. You once said that when you grew up, you would never leave me. You were right, you didn't leave. You followed me all the way to what I built and stole each brick in secret. The courtroom remained silent. I placed my hand on the microphone and ended with one last sentence. I didn't lose money. I lost what was called family. Some people wept. A faint sob came from the back rows. The judge, a gray-haired man with a firm, resonant voice, lifted his head, struck the gavel 3 times, and began to sentence. After reviewing all evidence, testimony, financial records, and verified recordings, the court declares Raymond Carter guilty of federal identity fraud, asset misappropriation, and federal money laundering. Sentence: 15 years in prison, no early parole. Not a sound followed. My father bowed his head. No tears. Only the shadow of someone who once loomed large in my childhood, now collapsed like a rotting tree. Loretta Carter, charged with conspiracy, falsified records, and aiding in financial abuse of trust. Sentence: 12 years in prison, eligible for reduction upon completion of financial restitution and rehabilitation programs. My mother burst into tears. The drops fell onto the collar of her neatly pressed blouse. She didn't look at me. Not at my father, not at my sister. She only covered her face, as if it were all a dream that never happened. Jenna Carter, co-conspirator as the legal representative of the shell company. Charges: unlawful use of assets, falsifying business documents, third-degree federal fraud. Sentence: 8 years in prison, with eligibility for special rehabilitation if fully cooperating with authorities in related cases. Jenna clutched her lawyer's hand, her face pale as chalk. She still looked at me. That gaze no longer bitter, no longer pretending weakness, only raw despair remained. When I stepped out of the courtroom, the early winter sun brushed softly across my shoulders. The heavy doors closed behind me, carrying with them the 3 figures I once called blood. Ahead was another path without them, and I did not look back. Because everything that needed to be said, needed to be done, I had already finished. And the silence I walked into now was the silence of someone who had reclaimed herself. I left Texas 3 weeks after the trial, carrying only one suitcase and the paperwork needed to finalize the liquidation of everything tied to them. No announcements, no farewells. I sold the Austin house, the one that held memories of childhood and sleepless nights grinding through my first venture. I transferred the other 2 properties in my name that they had once leveraged for loans. Completely, without hesitation, I dismantled every material tie that had bound me to them, the ties that had left me torn between family and dignity. I moved to Portland, Oregon, a city without them, without old memories, where no one knew me beyond the quiet name Aaliyah Carter on a business registry. A place without prying eyes, without whispers of trials, scams, or charges. Only cold wind, fine rain, and the sense that I was weaving my life anew from the most shredded threads. I rented a small apartment by Lake Oswego, about a 15-minute drive from downtown. Each morning, I sat with coffee by the window, watching mist dissolve across the water, telling myself I no longer had to brace so hard. I had no one left to prove myself to, and no one left to disappoint because I refused to rescue them. A month later, I officially founded Boundaries First, a fund to support people who had suffered financial abuse within their families. I chose the name after many sleepless nights, because boundaries were what I never had. Boundaries that, if I had drawn them, would have kept my own blood from seizing my identity like a trinket. I wanted it to be a foothold for those, especially women, who had been treated as default ATMs under the excuse of kinship. It was small, but it was real. I didn't launch flashy campaigns or host galas. I just wrote a post on my personal page, telling the story as a survivor, not a hero. I received thousands of emails. Mothers tricked into signing loan papers by their children, seniors whose credit cards were drained by grandchildren, young people whose scholarships were mortgaged by their own parents with forged contracts. I read each line and saw myself in them. The confusion, the humiliation, the betrayal, and then the resolve that rose when you realized you were not alone. A year passed. Portland became the place where I learned to smile at the sound of wind chimes outside my porch, where I dared leave windows open at night, trusting no one could enter my life unless I allowed it, where I could look in the mirror and no longer see my mother, father, or Jenna's shadow lingering behind me. One late autumn afternoon, I received a letter from the federal prison in Florida. The sender, Jenna Carter. I opened it with steady hands, though my heart tightened at the sight of her familiar handwriting. Even after more than a year, I still recognized the way she wrote the letter G, leaning far to the right, as if pushed by haste. Dear Aaliyah, I know I don't deserve to write this letter. But if I don't, I'm afraid I'll lose my mind. I've read so much about your fund. I know I have no right to be proud, but I'm glad you're still living true to the goodness in you, the same goodness our family exploited for far too long. Every day here, I think of you. Of that night in Florida, when you turned on the recorder and looked at me as if I were a stranger, I cried not out of fear, but because I realized I was no longer part of your life. I understand if you never forgive me, but I'm still writing, because you need to know, none of us believed you would ever cut ties. And that is what I regret most. Not the consequences, but losing the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I only hope you live a truly peaceful life. Jenna. I folded the letter, without tears, without anger, only an emptiness spreading lightly in my chest. I placed it in a drawer, locked it, and never replied. Not out of cruelty, but because I refused to reopen a chapter that had already closed. I didn't want to begin a conversation I knew would lead nowhere. I had already walked past the edge, climbed each jagged stone with bloodied hands not to look back into the same well and ask why I once fell. Life moved forward with new projects, new victims protected, small panels where I spoke not as a criminal but as a witness to change. I remember one day, at a talk with law students, someone asked me, "What was the hardest thing you ever had to do?" I didn't hesitate. It was learning that not everyone who shares your blood is family. I left the lecture hall that evening just as the sunset draped the city, its last rays glowing against the sign outside my small foundation office. Boundaries. First, those letters were no longer just a slogan. They had become a choice etched into my heart. And I understood then, some wounds never heal. But you can still live, still love, still build a life that doesn't bleed for the past. Because once they thought I was an endless source of money, now they finally know family is not an unlimited credit card. If it were you, when receiving a letter begging forgiveness from the very person who once pushed you to the edge, what would you do? Could you calmly read it to the last line, fold it, and never look back? Or would your heart soften, even for a moment, at the memory of what was once called family? I don't have the absolute right or wrong answer. I only know that sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean letting them return. It means letting go yourself, so you can walk forward lighter. And what about you? What do you believe truly makes a family? Is it blood, loyalty, or boundaries that are respected? Share your thoughts in the comments. I always read them, and I believe every personal story is a piece of the puzzle that helps us understand one another better. If you want to keep walking with me to hear more honest stories, sometimes painful, but always full of resilience about family, kinship, and healing, please subscribe to this channel. There is so much more I want to share, not to reopen wounds, but so that each of us might find something meaningful for ourselves.